I've come today to St Cuthberts Mill in Somerset, which is the mill which makes the paper that I'm going to be working on today, which is Bockingford, 300 grams, which is thick enough to be able to paint a large watercolour on without it buckling up. The beauty of watercolour, for me and for many painters throughout history, is that you can carry it around really easily. You can pack it up, a very small amount of equipment, into a rucksack. My equipment here consists simply of a board, my paper, my paint box, and a couple of watercolour paintbrushes, one which is large, the other which is slightly smaller, and my water pot. And as long as you've got something to sit on, the beauty of watercolour is you can transport it around very easily. The first consideration when you're about to set out to make a painting is the composition, and here I've chosen 3 individual trees set against a background of the mill building, a long low building with a series of arched windows which to me make a lovely rhythmic repetitive pattern that runs or will run behind the individual trees. So there's a strong horizontal and some verticals. It's really important to have an idea in your mind of how it might fit onto the page and how it's going to work finally when it's completed. So I'm going to start my painting by plotting the shapes and the main elements of the composition. I very often make just a series of dots and dashes, and I don't use a pencil to draw out the scheme of things first. I just use little marks to remind myself where things should go and get them roughly in the right place. I might do some basic measurements by holding out my brush and just seeing how things compare height and width. The nearest tree, which is a birch, I'm just going to plot it with a few marks, a very dilute mixture of paint that can be, if it's slightly in the wrong place, it can be then incorporated into the final painting. The second tree is going to be roughly there, and the third, which is smaller in the distance, I'll make a mark. One of the important elements of a composition when you're painting outside is, of course, shadows. And I've made quite a study of sunlight and shadow, and very often it becomes the subject of my painting. While the sun is out, in case it clouds over or when the sun moves round, I want to make sure that my shadows are always consistent, so I'm going to put them in at the very beginning of the painting, just making little reference marks as to how far the shadow of this birch is going to stretch across the grass and where it's going to stop. And it's the shadows and the lightness around the shadows that will ultimately give the sense of light. And then if the sun goes in, it doesn't matter. I've still got a record of if I want a strong shadow in the painting, that's where it should be. And if the sun comes out again, all well and good. If not, I know where those darks should be. So plotting the shadows as well as the actual architectural elements of the painting, as in the trees, the mill behind, the windows and so on. The areas of light and dark are just as important to note at this stage as the more concrete things in the painting. Once the general composition has been plotted and I've got a rough layout of where everything's going to go, I then start looking to see where the darkest tones are and where the lightest tones will be in the painting, and how these tones are going to be distributed around the composition. And here it's in the hedge, in the dark foliage of the hedge, and in the windows of the building. And so by mixing a really strong colour, I try to get that strong enough first time so that I don't have to keep going back and painting over and over again. And meanwhile, the light tones, if I have something that's light against dark, like these little leaves of the tree against the building, I need to make sure to leave spaces where the leaves are going to come, and I can fit in some green into that area at a later stage of the painting when it's dry. So I have to be careful not to obliterate any areas that I want to be kept light. It's the tone in a painting, the range of tones, that gives the effect of light.